Hi, my name is Doah Kim, and today I want to tell you about a story. Imagine this. You're sitting underneath a giant willow tree, and it's a quiet Sunday afternoon, and the temperature around you feels just right. And suddenly at that moment, something strange happens. You see this white rabbit muttering frantically past you, "I'm late! I'm late! I'm late!" And naturally, you follow until you end up in front of this dark, mysterious portal. And now you have two choices given in front of you. Will you jump into that rabbit hole and risk everything you have? Or will you just walk away pretending that nothing has happened? Will you jump into that portal? If you want to do that, please raise your hand right now. Okay, great, I see some hands up. And thanks to that, you're exactly at the place that you have to be. And honestly, I want to share you about this story called Alice in the Wonderland, which you guys might have known before. And the reason I'm bringing this up to you today isn't just to start us with a little bedtime story. It's because there's a deeper meaning embedded behind this story. Because the real secret in her is that realization doesn't come from control. It comes from uncertainty, from falling, and the change in perception that comes after that. So today I want to talk to you about a bit of my story and how I was able to become that Alice myself. And this all began with this story. You know, when I was young, I used to be that type of a girl who loved watching Disney movies and filled my closets with different costumes and dresses. I know it sounds silly, but back then, that's how I made fun of myself. By stepping into different costumes, I always saw different versions of myself, which I thoroughly enjoyed. But it was not until this day when I was 13. Everything started to change after then. It was a day when I was going to Canada to be an international student on my own. I was so excited that I could barely sleep, thrilled by the idea of living in a foreign country by my own. And back then, living in a foreign country was almost like a fantasy. But I saw something very unusual on my way there. I saw my mom in the front seat, quietly crying on her own in the driving seat, and when I saw that, my heart was shattered, though I never understood why at that time until years later. Now, fast forward, I decided to move to the United States in boarding school from Canada. And the reason why I did that was because I was ambitious and wanted to be more and to prove myself to others. But the moment I stepped into that place, everything shattered because the reality was far different than my expectation. Everything was different, and I started to become depressed and anxious day and night. And just as I was about to adjust to this new schedule, everything shattered overnight. It was a day when I was all packed and was ready to go back to the States after a long summer break. And something weird happened because I was fully ready to go back to States and I had all my plans ready. But there came a sudden phone call. It was a call from a hospital telling me that I've been diagnosed with latent tuberculosis. As fancy as it sounds like, I had no clue what that meant in some certain clinical definitions. But one thing I was sure was that this was about to change my life and everything that I had in my plan list. Because after that, I was forced to stop and let go of everything that I've been building in the United States. But ironically, I've always been the type of a person who welcomed change because I was excited for change and I was wondering what whole new world waits ahead of me. But it was not the feeling of excitement this time. It was the fear of uncertainty. And only when I was able to embrace this uncertainty, everything started looking different. Because now, everything was ruined, my plans and everything, and I had nothing more to lose. And only after then, I was able to become honest to my own emotions and the feelings that I've been trying to hide for years and years. It was the feeling of loneliness and disconnection I had when I was living across these different countries by myself. And when I acknowledged these emotions one by one, everything started to clear up. And that's exactly the point. Only when we fail, we start to realize the new possibilities around us. And that's why I'm here, to share with you the 5 key strategies that has helped change my life and navigate through these times of uncertainty. Because the reason why I'm here is probably because of these 5 strategies. And unless I've experienced this, I wouldn't be talking to you guys about this. Because these aren't just strategies that you can read from textbooks or learn from school. It's a real life lesson that you can apply to your own lives as well. So if you are willing to open your sense of perspective into an entirely new world, you'll be walking surprised with the change that you were able to achieve today. Now, let's get into the first step. It's actually acknowledgement. And this is where all the change begins. And think of this change like more of the four-leaf clover that you see right here, because it never comes at your command or think that it's time. It only commences without any prior notice and without even acknowledging that it's coming. But when it hits you, that's the time when you have to start this step. I still remember the story told by the professor I met at Oxford at a summer camp. He had this lecture about the shift in perception. And what he talked about was this little goldfish right here, living in its fish tank. It was so proud of its castle, its little pebbles, and the food that came along every day. But from an outside point of view, it was so painfully clear that the fish has never seen the ocean out there. And I feel like, to a certain extent, most people in our society live like this goldfish. The society draws a line of what to value, how to live, and what success looks like. But there's gonna be a time when we hit that wall. And only when we hit that wall and acknowledge the limit, we begin to see things clearly. And only after then, change starts happening. And the impact of shift in perspective isn't just theoretical, as it could be proven by longitudinal research, according to Harvard Business Review. And they told us that nearly 46% of people who had a longitudinal perspective and a flexible mindset was able to achieve far more long-term growth and success. That's nearly half the people. Think of how much difference that it can bring to your lives just by having a slightest shift in perspective. And now that you've acknowledged, you might wonder, what comes next? And it's actually to leap into the rabbit hole. And leaping into the rabbit hole isn't easy because it's dark and narrow. And just like that, the discovery of truth isn't something that's very tangible and that looks very clear to you. It takes a lot of effort and painstaking amount of courage to actually go into that rabbit hole. You know, when Alice first leaped into that rabbit hole, it wasn't because she had a plan or knew what was going on back there in the rabbit hole. It's because she wanted to change. And that's when all the things started to make a difference. And once she got back to the bottom of the rabbit hole, she says to herself, I can't go back to yesterday because I was a completely different person back then. Just like that, once you leap into the rabbit hole, a whole new world waits ahead you. Now, the next step is actually to integrate new reference points. Now that you've leaped into the rabbit hole and you're at the bottom of it all, it's time for you to build it up again by integrating new reference points and build your own foundations, but this time not from the values that society gives you, but from the bottom of your heart. This is what you need. And here's one truth that I've came to acknowledge from the years I've been traveling abroad and talking to different kinds of people from all different sets of cultural values and perspective. It's a fact that our values, our knowledge, and even our skills can never outgrow the lived experiences that we had. And one of the professors that I admire, Dr. Kwan, puts it this way: no matter how hard we try, we can never surpass those who live and grow through their real life and shared experience. And just like that, what we see is the formation of perception. And you might think of perception as a conventional definition that you see right here: the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through the senses. But the perception that I'm talking about today is a bit more complex than that, so let me break this down for you. It's built in these three layers. At the core is the worldview. And the worldview is what shapes the value system, which ultimately directs our behavioral action. The behavioral action is the way we think, act, or feel. So, the school may teach us about information, but they never teach us about how to think critically or to act. These are just coming natural through our inherent life experiences, and we call this process the rationalization process. Because only when we see it and feel it through experience, it really becomes ours, and we can claim it as our life. Now, think of this reference point like a map. The more coordinates you gather, the further you can travel. And just like that, back in the day, map used to be one's greatest treasures because a sailor or captain can never go beyond the horizon without this map because they don't know the destination or where to even start from. And that's exactly the importance of reference points because the more you gather, the further you can travel. Just like that, in today's society, the lived experiences that we have will be the greatest treasure that one can ever own. Now that we've acknowledged, leaped into the rabbit hole, and integrating your reference points, it's time to course correct your failure. And this step is actually the hardest because it makes you to acknowledge who you are and to face these changes and failures that you've made. Over time, I made a lot of mistakes. I had a terrible misconception that I was smarter than others and acted like one, which was a complete mistake. And honestly, when I was crashing into this gap between the reality and my expectation, things started to change, and I was able to better reflect on who I was, not in some kind of distorted view, but actually to really face who I really am, what I'm fond of. Now, I feel like a lot of people have this misconception that time will eventually heal everything, even your wounds and all the pains that you have. And we call this in Korean idiom, 시간이 약이다, which means the time is a healing factor. But in reality, time is not a healing factor, but instead transformation is. Because if you think that time will pass and it will eventually heal you, that's not going to make any difference. It's only the transformation that happens throughout time that really makes a difference. So unless you're willing to step into this world of transformation, nothing really going to do for you, nor even the time. Now, let me break this down for you in a mathematical equation. If you see here, 0 times 1,000 is ever going to be 0. But once you have that 0.01, that starts making a difference, 10. And imagine, 0.1 times 1,000 is 100. And 1 times 1,000 is 1,000. It can go on and on and on. Just like this, shift in perspective doesn't take that much. It could be either 0.01 or 0.1 each every day. And think of how much immense growth that it can bring to your lives if this happens, like a period. Now, you have our last step, which is to expand your horizon. Now that you've done all of these steps, congratulations, because now you're almost at the end. But this is actually the hardest, because expanding your horizon needs to redefine what you mean by looking into something. At its lowest level, you see something as 看, which is to look in a Chinese character. But this level of looking into something is just looking into something without no intention and think that it will ever change you. It's just you're passively looking at it. But at a higher level, you see something as 察, which is to perceive. This means not just to look into something, but look into it with interaction, intention, and attention. This needs a lot of focus, actually. Because the society that we're living in, it's so hard to discern what is true and false and what is actually valuable to us. So only when we're able to reach this level of focus and attention and intentionality in our lives, we start getting to see things from a far clearer point of view. And now that you've completed all 5 steps, you might wonder, what's next? And now it's time for you to be that white rabbit, for you to be the moment who will bring the acknowledgement and the change to someone else's life. Because you know when White Rabbit was running around and muttering frantically, I'm late, I'm late. It isn't just because he's late. It's because there was a critical moment that was to bring about in Alice's life. And I call this a creative minority, those who doesn't follow the shared values, but actually to build one and build an entirely new ecosystem around them. And only when you're able to reach that level, things are going to be different and everything else begins to follow like a cycle. Looking back to it now, I feel like the old versions of myself remind me a lot of Alice. Because you know, the part when she drinks the portion to grow big or shrink small, it isn't just optical illusion. It's actually a shift in perception and a metaphor in our own lives. I've experienced that personally. When I was in Canada, I felt very strong and big, but when I came to United States, I was as small as I could ever be. And just like that, when we move places or when we move countries or schools, we aren't just moving physically, but there's a critical shift in perception that happens. And the set of perspective, the set of values that comes along within our surroundings. And it was not until when I was diagnosed with this critical illness that I couldn't ignore that I acknowledged the limit around me. And only after that, I was able to course correct and integrate new points. The real difference that it brought me wasn't just a change, but it was actually a new sense of control, comfort, and horizon. Now, I want to bring this moment of acknowledgement to your lives too, because I wouldn't be here if that was not the point. And before I end this presentation, I want to talk to you about someone who has brought this change to my life and who has been the white rabbit to me. And she's actually sitting here right in this stage. And she's my mom. So I want to tell you a bit about her life story as well. When I was young, I always remember her teaching other students as a violin teacher in a smaller town called Daegu. And when the signal came to her, and when she saw that the need and perception is needed, she jumped into the rabbit hole, which is for her to go to Seoul with no resources, no connection, and no money. But let's that put aside. She had to jump into that rabbit hole, and the only thing she had was the willingness to change and to embrace that uncertainty. And it was only when she actually stepped into that place of the edge of possibility, she was able to reach so much more. And today she is a CEO coaching various different clinicians and doctors all across Korea. And when I saw that in my life, I thought maybe I could make a difference in my life as well. And that was my whole point. The motivation and inspiration of all this talk, it comes from her. So today I want to be like her so that you may also bring changes in your lives as well. To bring that need and perception, and to acknowledge it. Because, trust me, only when you acknowledge, everything starts to change. And you might think of this lesson like 5 pinpoints that you can memorize so you can achieve success in your life. Of course you can do that. But again, you're missing the point here, because only if you'd had a wider set of perspective, you could have seen what I've been hinting all along. It's that if you combine these 5 steps of its first words, you get what we know as Alice. You know that Alice has been with us all along, but just because we didn't have the perception to really recognize this, we couldn't really know that Alice was coming here all along. And just like that, I think we tend to miss the clues right in front of us. Because even though there are clues, unless there's a direct cue that change your perspective, nothing will change. So that's exactly the point why I'm here, to bring that change in front of you guys. And now lastly, I want to talk to you about this whole thing that I want to convey in this talk today. The next time when you see that white rabbit, leap forward and acknowledge it, because being an Alice isn't just really falling down the 50 feet rabbit hole or being diagnosed with a chronic illness like me. It could just be something as subtle that could change your perception. And it could be like a spark sense of curiosity, a small discomfort, or maybe a tear that you never understand until years later. But only when you acknowledge it and leap forward, trust me, everything else will begin like a cycle, and it could just be the beginning of what you could ever become. Thank you.